All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Looks like we have 31 people on the call so far. Just like we've been doing previously, because we have a lot to get to. If you are on the council, and here, if you can put your name in the chat, that'd be great, so that we can determine whether we have a quorum or not.
Brad, this is Ellen Valentino. I'm going to be driving and can't put my name into the chat, but if you could flag that I'm here, I do plan to vote. Although I might not be voting in chat, I'll raise my hand and acknowledge my vote. Thank you.
Yes, and I just put your name in the chat so that we can count that. All right, so I see 13 people online so far, so that is enough to get started. Again, if you are on the council and you're here, if you could put your name in the chat, that'd be great, just in case if we had some stragglers. So, all right. I'm going to turn it over to our co-chairs to see if they have anything to say. But other than that, we'll get right into it. Michael or Angie?
Angie, why don't you kick off?
Good morning. Just thanks again for meeting us today for this quick meeting. We hope to get a lot accomplished and get these definitions solidified. We're really excited to come together and do this. So thank you again, and we appreciate everybody's input. Michael?
Thanks, Angie. I also want to acknowledge our council members that testified at the bill hearing on Tuesday. I just want to thank all of you. You all know yourselves. It's really a pleasure to see friends there. So I think in that spirit, with everybody really driving towards the same goal, and to build on Angie's comment, we're focused on getting these definitions wrapped up today, and then anything else can happen after that. Thanks a lot. Brad, over to you.
All right, cool. So as you all know, we had a number of, looks like Scott is joining as well. So we have 14 people. As you know, we reviewed and voted on recommendations in our last meeting in order to get something to the General Assembly before the hearing last Tuesday. We did send a letter with those preliminary recommendations, knowing that we would have to come back and finish that conversation. There's going to be multiple opportunities to do that as well, but just wanted to make sure that we were getting to all of the items that were submitted to us. I did add this item from the Sierra Club. This was actually part of the initial recommendations that we had sent out, but it did not make it to the recommendation package that we had filled out. So that wasn't intentional. That was we just wanted to make sure that we also talk about this one as well. That is also in the agenda too, and there was definitely some testimony on this. Ellen,
I do have a question. I don't remember it being part of the recommendation. I remember it being a topic. So I just want to clarify when we get to it, of course, open discussion, unless I'm seeing it right. If you're talking about that deposit legislation, yeah, I do not remember it being a EPR Advisory Council recommendation, or I would have objected. I remember there being language that talked about if a deposit system is adopted, then the PRO will develop a plan or submit recommendations, but I don't remember seeing this language prior at any time. Just flagging that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe
yeah,
I could have missed it easily, Bradley, but I'm pretty attuned at least on that one topic, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, understood. So we had received information from the Sierra Club and Trash Free Maryland, and you yourself, Ellen. So we were combining those. I think one in the early versions it was in there, but it didn't make it to one of the later versions. So
Yeah, just a flag. I agree. The topic wasn't there. This language was not in there. Then combining the two, they're not really combined, but totally look forward to the conversation, open to some sort of language, but this language is not language that I don't think combines anything that was put forth. I just want to flag it early so when we get there, I have some clarity here. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So let's get right into the environmental impact definition. So it looks like someone does want to join the call too, just to make sure that we're getting them in. Oh, no, it looks like someone accepted that. So we have this definition for environmental impact. From the feedback that we received, we had 2 comments on this one. So the first one was from CAA, in that the pro has little or no ability to influence or monitor anything related to extraction or processing of raw materials. And then the next one was from Chaz, just to mention that there was no mention of greenhouse gas emissions in this definition of environmental impact. So I'll zoom in so we don't get distracted by the other definitions, but opening the floor up on the environmental impact definition. Peter?
Maybe just be helpful if I'm not sure who wrote this, but I know it came from the Minnesota bill, but what is the point of the definition? Why is the definition germane to the legislation? And again, I mentioned, I'm just not sure what they're intending to do. So the pro has abilities, a sphere of influence to be able to influence certain aspects. I don't know what our ability is to impact, or I don't think we have any ability to impact extraction and processing of raw materials. Distribution is likely pretty minimal impact as to how a package is being distributed into the state. So there's a bunch of these areas that I guess I'm just not sure I understand. If it's applying to the pro, it's applying things that I'm not sure we have any ability to be able to influence. And I'm concerned about, as you have definitions in legislation that's imposing requirements of something that the pro actually can't deliver on.
I'll turn it over to Kelly. I think this came from a joint submission from the Sierra Club and Trash Free Maryland. So Kelly?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I appreciate your comment, Peter. And this actually goes back to a comment or a suggestion I made, I think, back in October. And the needs assessment, it relates to some language in the needs assessment that we haven't seen yet, so it might be covered or defined in the needs assessment. But even the new legislation says the needs assessment shall include an analysis of the potential environmental impact of an extended producer responsibility program, including through, and it has a few things enumerated. And one of those is reduced environmental damage. And so I'm not sure how the needs assessment is defining environmental damage, but we were looking at other examples of, what could be in the scope of that, what might not be in the scope of that. But it seems like it would be helpful to spell that out in the legislation to help clarify it for the future, so that in the future, there's not an argument about what should have been in there or what's not, or what's impossible to manage. And the only reason for looking at Minnesota was it was a recently passed, kind of consensus-based bill that looked like a direction places were heading. And I think for a final product, it can help. We don't have to take what another state has done, but it can help to harmonize with what another state has done if another state is working on something similar. So that was the rationale. I'm open to other ideas for how to define that, but I'm still curious how we'll define environmental damage.
Yeah, Martha, we're on mute too.
Sorry. Yes. um, if you remember that the very beginning of this whole exercise on extended producer responsibility for packaging was launched because of the concerns of the environmental impact of plastic packaging and pollution. And so I don't think this is requiring the Circular Action Alliance to monitor the processing and extraction of anything, but just that the overall, the environmental impact of packaging on the environment needs to be taken into consideration. That would include the processing of it, of any given material, of including the green. I noticed that Chaz said greenhouse gas. This is, of course, greenhouse gas emissions, all these other things. How can we minimize the impact of all of that that's going to packaging? The impact of packaging on all of that. And that includes, things like minimum recycled content, or reducing certain kinds of packaging, or packaging waste. All of that presumably would have an impact on the environment. But that was the starting point for this whole discussion, was concerns about packaging affecting the environment and human health. So I think it's good to have this, and I like the definition for the Minnesota bill, but if you think there's room for improvement, go ahead and try it. Thank you.
Michael?
Sure, thanks. I just want to clarify something. By the way, to Charles's comment that Martha alluded to, I want to make sure, Charles, what you're talking about is that EPR should lead to lower carbon footprint, because when we start talking about some of these things that are not very clear, it gets challenging. Is that what you're alluding to? For instance, circularity will lead to carbon footprint. To Martha's point, having recycled content included at some point will also lead to lower carbon footprint. I don't want to put words into your mouth. I just want to get the point you're trying to make, Charles, if that's correct.
What's the point of discussing environmental impact if we're not discussing the impact on greenhouse gas emissions?
Exactly. So and the reason I'm bringing that up, I just want to make sure you say that. And the reason is this: we know that packaging impacts greenhouse gas, no question about it. If you look at most supply chain for the CPG industry, I think that's how to approach it. It's about 8% of the overall carbon footprint in the scope 3. So you have to reduce it. And that's what this is all about. That's what circularity is all about. I think we should frame it in that context when it's impactful and measurable.
But circularity, Michael, does not necessarily guarantee lower greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, if you're using the same container over and over again, you're not going to be creating new things. That's what I'm saying. However you define it, let's put it in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. That, to me, makes sense. It's where I'm heading.
Scott, I think you had a comment, and then Peter.
Sorry, I was on mute. Look, I mean, greenhouse gas is not the only environmental impact. There's toxicity. There's all sorts of other issues that go into this. So it's really just an issue of scope here. I tend to agree with Peter. There's limits to what the PRO can do, but we're also talking about transportation. We're talking about the trucks. We're talking about, if we're going to talk about just the packaging, then you might as well talk about the entire system. Electrifying the trucks. I mean, we can get into any long list of environmental factors that are encompassed in the system, and it's really, I think if you want to have a general statement on environmental impact in the goals and the missions, right, and that's what all of the other tools inside the fee setting are for. You do it, but you can't just, I mean, I don't know. I tend to
be with Peter here. I mean, yes, you want all those things to be better, but it's a long list of things that the pro is not the best. That's the department's job for Maryland more than the pro's job for Maryland.
Peter?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, my worry is just as we add in definitions, not knowing exactly, if this says, there's a statement that says the pro needs to assess the environmental impact, and this is the definition of environmental impact of the program, then what are you asking the pro to do? And potentially then you're asking then for every single producer to provide greenhouse gas emissions associated with potentially 8 different elements. They need to report on the greenhouse gas associated with the label that may come from one manufacturer, the cap that may come from another manufacturer, the main body that may come from another. And the pro is going to need to have to capture all of that data as well as distribution data. And you need to be careful in how you set up the legislation. So it's very difficult to come to an alignment on a definition when you don't know exactly how it's going to be used in the text of the document.
Chaz?
Yeah, I happen to be very sympathetic to Peter's position. To me, including greenhouse gas emissions is simply one example. Martha mentioned others, recycled content and some other options. In some ways, I look at this language, and you can take out the including greenhouse gas emissions. That was not a suggested amendment.
Okay.
But you can look at this language, and I wonder what it truly means. Besides the fact that we want less impact environmentally. And in that case, what do we hope to accomplish from this? And I think Peter's raised some very good issues about what is within the scope of a PRO's ability to actually influence.
Michael?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so the point here is I completely agree. You can't have the PRO police, this concept of reducing the impact. That's not their job. Peter, I don't think anybody's asking pro to do that. Maybe this is something to think about being MDE's responsibility or something like that. And we find a simple definition that will not complicate things. But definitely PRO is not going to go tell a company use a 10% recycled content, all those things. That's not their job to go do that. So I think if we're putting it on the PRO, I would agree that that's not the place this should be.
Chaz, and then
Chaz, my hand should be down.
All right, Abigail.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just emphasize the important thing here. While, a definition of environmental impact can be useful, we want to be careful that it doesn't overextend a reasonable level of scope for the program in general. You look at some of the EPR programs in other parts of the country that are going into effect, and some of the expectations could lead to colleagues of Peter having to travel out of the country to inspect facilities potentially, and things like that are just, kind of unexpected ramifications of us not having clear scope. And so, if the intent of this legislation is to have a positive impact on materials that are out there that are not appropriately managed now or something like that, then adding on things related to, and I know that we just removed greenhouse gas, but some of these other goals that the state of Maryland has and is tackling in other legislation and through commissions and things like that, I just worry that it creates a top-heavy expectation for a program that is already going to be incredibly complex to make effective and, shift into the arena of a bridge to nowhere.
So could you take off the back end of the definition, because there are a bunch of goals that are in the current legislation, like PCR, recyclability, contamination rates, stuff like that. Just throwing that out there. Chaz?
Yeah, one point about the legislation. As was said at the hearing on Tuesday, the bill that was introduced will be replaced by a totally different bill based on the Minnesota law, which raises some questions. I really don't think we should revert. We should refer to the original bills we have, since the author has already stated he is planning to introduce a vastly amended bill.
All right. Peter? You're on mute.
Oh, sorry, and this is just me on the fly. Is there an ability if we were to amend the legislation, sort of, we'd say environmental impact means the impact of a covered material on human health and the environment, and then added something like within the scope of the program? If we were to just change it that way, does that satisfy the concerns of the group? Would that cover?
But Peter, also, that doesn't mean the pro should have the responsibility of policing that, right? That's not what you're saying.
Well, again, I don't know how it's being used, right? I don't know. I think the goal of this is to ensure the program is delivering better environmental and health outcomes.
Yes.
And so, yeah. Sorry, Angie, I'll let you.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there needs to be a definition of who is responsible for, carrying out, what I mean, and monitoring this almost. So I think you're right. The pro should not be that person, but I think there should be some sort of direction to show in this. Maybe that will make it more clear for everyone. I mean, I kind of like the idea of MDE being, responsible for that.
Martha? You're on mute.
Sorry. This isn't a statement about who's responsible for what. It's just a definition of what we mean by environmental impact of the covered materials. It doesn't assign it to anybody, and a lot of the things that are in there already that they're already required to do does have an impact on human health and the environment. I think we're making this much more complicated than it needs to be, and it is consistent with the Minnesota bill if that's the intent to eventually go with that. It's the reason why we have this bill to begin with, is because of concerns about the impact of covered materials on human health and the environment. So if you wanted to shorten it, fine, but the impact of a covered material would include the impact from all phases of its production and recovery, right? So I think that you should not be concerned about responsibility at this point. It's just a definition of a term.
Peter?
Martha, I take your point, but as soon as you define something broadly in legislation and there is an entity that's required to comply with the law, there are going to be many people that will interpret that over a period of time. And so, if you say environmental impact and it doesn't show up anywhere else in the bill, then I guess it's of no issue, but then it's of no purpose. But as soon as you add something in to say the producer needs to monitor the environmental impact of the program, as soon as it gets put into text within the legislation, then it becomes an interpretation, and the pro will need to, the compliance organization, whoever that might be, will need to comply with that law. And so that's the concern that this has to have a function within the legislation.
Kelly? And then Chaz, and then we'll probably have to get to a vote
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I really appreciate what you're saying, Peter. And so I just wanted to, like, I think I searched through the legislation and it does use the word environment, but only 3 times. Like, it describes members of the advisory committee, you know, from an environmental advocacy organization, environmentally feasible composting processes, and then the section on the needs assessment. So if the needs, maybe it just defines, you know, what is included in the needs assessment, and it's defined already in legislation who's responsible for that. But it helps clarify what the requirements are for the needs assessment, because the needs assessment language currently requires an analysis of the environmental impact of the program. And I like saying within the scope of the program, because that, you know, that lets it not be entirely open-ended, because I appreciate the point too, like, where does it end and which process do you use?
All right, so it looks like the 2 hands went down. Is there, are we good with taking this back half out and then having this language, and then is there a motion to vote?
Motion to vote.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, so if you can raise your hand, if you are for this. I did see that Mario did join us a little bit late, so we actually have 15 people on the line who are on the council. So if you want to raise your hand for a yes on this language as written. So I see 14. If you can lower your hands now, we'll do the no vote. Is there anyone a no vote? Oh, shoot, my num lock is off. All right, and then we did have 1 person abstain.
Sorry, I meant to vote yes. It toggled too fast, I think.
Oh, okay. So I guess we have 15 yes for this, and then 0 no then. All right, cool. Okay, taking a look at responsible in market. So this is the definition. There was a comment from CAA, I believe, on this one. Was this meant to be a part of the definition, or is it just a note for the advisory council's consideration? I think it was intended to be definition that if the advisory council would recommend if we got the votes for it. All right, Peter.
Sorry, Bradley. I guess I'm just struggling. Wouldn't the department always have the ability to adopt regulations if they wanted to? Like, I'm just not sure I understand the purpose of the second piece. Like,
You mean B right here, or the department may adopt the regulations to identify responsible in market?
that
So,
specific.
We would, this bill or this legislation as written already requires us to write regulations, and so there may be some items that need to be clarified. But if there's not a reference to a responsible in market, it makes it tough for us to expand on that in regulation. Just as an example, typically when we're doing the regulations, we're defining the processes and further defining definitions. Abigail?
Yeah, so I had submitted some thoughts on this previously. I think that it's important to keep in mind that Maryland waste management, processing and so on is not limited to state borders. And so we should be cautious that responsible end market definitions do not block the ability for robust market dynamics that cross state borders, are impacted with the goal of enforcing state-specific standards on out-of-state or even out-of-country facilities that are buying recovered material and supporting strong recycling markets. Also, I think we've noted this in our comments in Oregon and in California, I think, that there are third-party entities that can help in certifying programs so that the full brunt of managing the determination of a responsible end market is not on the shoulders of MDE or the PRO, and sort of prevents a new thing being created when something already exists, and where responsible, sustainable practices are already taking place. So just wanted to flag those thoughts.
I don't think I'm going to be approved to go out of country as well, just to add on to that point. Chad?
Right.
A question for Peter, because it actually might not be an MDE employee, it might be a PRO employee or contractor. Do any of the Canadian or European laws have a similar responsible end market requirement? And if they do, how do they manage it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the construct around responsible end market has been something that's sort of been slowly building. British Columbia's program deals with this to some extent. Ontario has a bit of a different setup, and they are requiring, but they haven't put really necessarily anything fully into effect right now. I think, as from the perspective of CA, we're seeing responsible end market requirements in Oregon, in Colorado, in Oregon as well. And I think we're looking at this from how do we create a process that allows for those end markets to be audited in a way that is the same right across the board. So you're not forcing a smelter or a paper mill to be audited 15 times. You audit it once, and that audit can be used for each of the various states. And potentially that may translate itself into allowing it for to be used potentially for Canadian programs as well. But this is something that I think is evolving both in North America and in Europe around more desire to make sure that materials have been properly managed.
But in terms of practical application, we don't at this point know what that really means. Aside from the fact we want responsible in markets, we want environmentally responsible. So we don't know what that means in terms of implementation or just sheer cost.
There's program plans that are put forward both in Oregon and Colorado that both include sections around how verification of end markets would look. And I think so you can look at those documents as examples around how the pro is looking to approach those requirements in other states.
Okay, so we have concepts, but we don't have yet examples of actual implementation.
Well, I think there's examples in other jurisdictions, but yeah, in the US, obviously we don't have an implemented packaging program yet.
Okay, thank you.
Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Peter that the end markets, to the extent that Maryland joins the group of states that are doing EPR for packaging and includes a responsible end market provision in the law, it should sync as much as possible with the auditing work that's being done for the other states. There are some differences between California and Oregon in particular. about where they set the end market, like what part of the supply chain, value chain is the end market, which I think, might be important for us to get into, especially with what Abigail was raising in terms of the scope of end markets that are available to Maryland material, but may not process in Maryland, right? So that might be something that we want to talk about, but I think generally you don't want to create a whole different auditing process for responsible end markets in Maryland that doesn't exist in any of the other states.
Martha?
Yeah, Scott, isn't that something that could be determined in rulemaking? Looking across all those specifics about when the end is going to be. I mean, that sounds to me like a classic example of the rulemaking purpose.
Yes.
Okay,
Sure.
thank you. Thank you for that.
Yep.
So maybe it's the rulemaking shall include a process on validating responsible end markets, or include that in the plan as well. It could also be submitted in the plan. So there could be a couple different avenues for that.
Yeah, less is always more when you're writing the bill. So the less you put in statute and the more technical detail that you leave to the regs, I think, is generally a bill writer's dream here. Oregon, there was some backlash. I'll just finish. There was some backlash in Oregon from some parts of industry that may receive small amounts of Oregon material because Oregon's definition of responsible end markets didn't stops with anybody who ever receives any material that may have originated out of Oregon, right? And if you get a de minimis amount of stuff from Oregon and then you want to subject yourself to all of the auditing processes that Oregon DEQ wants to put on you, there are some people who may make the decision to not take any material from Oregon anymore. I think that that's an issue. I don't want to put words in. I don't want to. Maybe Abby's talking about something different, but
well,
Maryland needs a more regional outlook on its end markets, I think, just because of its geography and size. So
as a trade association, it's not my role to talk about markets in any sort of specificity, but you've got recovered fiber facilities in Pennsylvania and Virginia, for example, and so any environmental policy that might differ between those states and Maryland could result in some sort of decision that it's not a sufficiently responsible end market. And it would be for the facilities in those states to decide, are we willing to make the changes for, to our facility to be in compliance with a different state's policies in order to receive fiber, or do we want to just get it from somewhere else where we don't have to make those capital investments on top of the other things going on? And that's, nothing to say for if it was, going further than that.
And just as a kind of a comment on that, in Maryland, we have the recycling markets law where we encourage recyclers to come to Maryland, but that doesn't necessarily mean we don't count recycling that is done out of the state or out of the country as well. Chaz?
Well, I think the points that have been made are incredibly apt because Maryland, in point of fact, does not have much in the way of manufacturing industry. Our plastics tend to go to the southeast or elsewhere. Our paper tends to go to the southeast or the north or elsewhere. Plastics should go to Canada. I don't think PET makes it to Mexico, although it could. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of our paper gets exported. So tracing and tracking all of this, it's, you know, it's easier said than done.
Martha?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. And you're making a lot of good points, but this is all something that can be considered when we get to the rulemaking. And it's not something we can really fix now. So I would propose to vote on this definition with the recognition that MDE will be engaged in rulemaking to determine what we mean by the specifics, what would be the responsible end market definition in the bill. I mean, in the program, the specifics.
So is I guess the recommendation to include this language: a process for validating responsible end markets shall be included in either regulation or the plan submitted by the pro.
I would think that we want it in regulation.
And in order to have it in
I
regulation,
mean, absolutely absolutely by, I mean, not either or, but I mean, it seems to me the regulation should be covering it. And the plan submitted by the PRO should be compliant with the regulations that are decided in this discussion during rulemaking. That's my proposal, and I would like to suggest that we vote on this. We only have about 15 minutes left.
Yes. Do we have a second for a vote? Looks like Peter. So vote yes on language. So folks can raise their hand if you're on the advisory council, voting yes on this. So I see, 11, 12. Okay. 13. Looks like we have some people making up their minds. So I see 13 for 14, actually, for this definition. So I saw 14. If you can lower your hand, we'll do the no vote now. And then I see 1 no vote. And since we have 15, we don't have anybody abstaining. Okay. All right, moving on to the next one. I'll put this all on one page. Okay. Recycle or recycling. There was a definition proposed. The comment from Chaz was, does MD already have a definition for recycling? So I have that already prepared or brought up. It's actually in statute, although it is a little bit different. So we have recyclable materials in, how do I zoom in right here? And that is in the environment article. I zoomed in just a little bit too much. Defined right here, those materials that would otherwise become solid waste for disposal in a refuse disposal system and may be collected, separated, or processed and returned to the marketplace in the form of raw materials or products. Recyclable materials does not include incinerator ash. And then CMRA recyclables, which I believe that is defined as anything that is not specifically excluded from the definition of an MRA recyclable. So
Brad, check also solid waste and solid waste stream while you're there.
Also, COMAR 26.04.09.02, the definition of recycling.
Oh, okay. I don't have that quite on hand, or in here, because I didn't see it in here. But we do have a definition of recycling. Chaz, could you put it in the chat if you have it? Yeah, Martha?
Yeah, I was just going to say that there are so many different references to this in the code. I mean, I've come across a lot of language in the various bills that say, for the purposes of this article or section, this is the way we will define something. And rather than going through all the definitions of recycling or recycle or recycling that we can find here, can we agree on this for this particular program?
What does it add? How does it differ from existing? I mean, it's kind of frustrating. I found one definition of recycling in Comar. There may be more. It kind of gets awkward in legislation when we start defining the same thing in different ways.
So just a comment on what does it add. We already interpret our recycling regulations in terms of MRA, very similar to this, actually. So you can't, if it's landfilled, it can't be counted. If it's combusted, can't be counted. If it's incinerated, can't be counted. And all those other items, we wouldn't count those as recycling.
And you shouldn't.
And since this ties back to the MRA, we just need to be careful. If we do propose a definition, it doesn't necessarily change how we count for the MRA, because these are MRA recyclables. So there's just that consideration as well. Abigail?
Yeah, I put a definition of recycling from the US EPA into the chat. I mean, I think that it's important to keep in mind that, like, as you were saying, the way that recycling is defined, because we have, this is an EPR program where there are going to be goals and percentages and things that are going to be tied to what recycling is, that recycling needs to be clearly defined and not include other things. So to me, seeing a reference to reused is concerning, because that is hard to tabulate. And I just want to make sure that it's a clean definition that doesn't accidentally include things that have their own separate definition, especially when you put it into the context of, the US EPA's waste hierarchy, where it's, reduce, reuse, recycle, then waste to energy, and so on. There's clear separation between these things, and that should continue in Maryland to the extent, if we're going to be creating a new or, further defining it for the purpose of this legislation, as opposed to saying the definition of recycling is what it is in state statute already.
Martha?
Do the current definitions that everybody's referred to include as recycling fuel production? I'm talking about chemical recycling here. We are not interested in having chemical recycling count as recycling in this bill.
So
and most of that is being used to convert plastic to fuel, or using glass as landfill cover or aggregate. That's not recycling either. And we're looking for, as Michael has said before, we're looking for some circularity here.
Yeah. So just to answer that, on the chemical recycling, if it does go to fuel production, then we would currently not count that as recycling. If it does go to creating new polymers, in the spirit of circularity, we would count that as recycling. About 2 years ago, we sent an email out to the various different county recycling coordinators on this topic. And I did put in our chat the current definition that we're using with our MRA recycling into the chat as well.
So, Brad, I thought we have a law already that prohibits, burning materials into fuel. Am I correct? We have that.
So it doesn't prohibit you from using it as fuel. It just means you can't count it as recycling.
Exactly. So that's I think that's the point. The point is, if you have a chemical process for converting something into a new packaging material, that's not a problem. It still leads itself to circularity. Okay. Thanks.
Scott?
Muted again. Yeah, I see the definition that you put in, Bradley, and that Shannon had linked to it, and it does. That is what I see for recycling. Martha did bring up alternative daily cover, which is not directly landfilling, and I would love to see that cleared up. That ADC is not recycling either.
So currently, ADC is counted as recycling in Maryland.
Yeah, that needs to change.
So,
And that's as long as the solid waste program allows that material to be used as ADC.
yeah, Shannon.
Well, we need to. I mean, half of the glass is going to ADC in Maryland now, so we need to fix that.
So according to our solid waste program, they would have to get approval through them in order to apply for ADC. And at this time, there's only one that is even considering it. So I would clarify with that, Scott, if you have concerns relative to ADC with our solid waste program.
When can we have a meeting about it? Because I have lots of concerns. Our data shows that over 40,000 tons of glass is going to ADC.
Brad, I'm going to say we'll talk offline about that.
Yeah, I think we need to reconcile that because
most of the other EPR laws do not allow. They get waste to energy, waste to fuel, and alternative daily cover do not count as recycling.
So we have a proposed definition that adds a little bit more clarity on our current definition. Do we have a motion to vote?
I move that we vote.
Do we have a second?
Second.
And definition as written does not include this right here. So, so if you are on the council, can you raise your hand?
Sorry.
Or yes?
Bradley, I'm just trying to figure out how much of what I see on that screen is what we're voting on. Just the paragraph or the extra one?
This right here.
Sorry, can you? Brad, I think the piece you said within the footprint of a landfill, but that's included above. Is that meant to be included then, or?
Oh, okay. Taken from the calendar with the addition of within the. Yeah. So this was just a.
No.
Take that out.
No. Okay.
It's really just this right here. That was just clarifying how it differed from California, I think. So a vote yes on the definition as written. If you can raise your hand. All right, so I see 8 currently. So if you can lower your hands. Now we're going to go to the no votes. So if you don't want to vote on this definition, raise your hand, please.
And Brad, you'll have to add in Abigail's sign as she had to drop off and says, I do not support changing the definition of recycling from the current state definition
Okay.
in the
all right.
chat.
So we would have 6 then, which means we have 1 abstaining.
Bradley, what were the main concerns with those that oppose?
I think we already have an excellent definition of recycling in the statute, as Bradley explained with the MDE process for the MRA. I don't see any need to change it. It works.
I voted no because I'm not going to support it until that doesn't count ADC as recycling.
But it doesn't. Other forms of disposal, including placement within the footprint of a landfill.
That was the whole point, putting that there, Scott.
Maryland is currently interpreting alternate daily cover as different than landfilling.
But this says placement within the footprint of a landfill, which would be alternate daily cover. So that would not be considered recycling with this definition.
Right. But would that be a form of disposal? I guess would be the question on that. Even though it is placed within the footprint of a landfill.
Which raises the question, we may not know the legal answer and we're voting upon something for which we really don't know the answer. Scott's raised a very good point.
Under this definition, as I see it, it would be considered, putting it in a landfill would be considered disposal, not recycling. That's the point.
I appreciate that, Martha, and I appreciate what people are trying to do there, but I'm not a lawyer on Maryland environmental law, so in other EPR laws, it's expressly prohibited. It doesn't count as recycling. It's much like waste energy doesn't, right? I mean, incineration is...
That's why it's in here, it's to prevent it from being considered recycling.
I understand. I'm not sure that specific wording does what I'm hoping that it does.
Benny? And we are losing.
Sorry, my hand was just raised because I was a no vote. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Kelly?
I just wondered about changing that clause because when within the footprint of a landfill was definitely meant to include ADC and also beneficial use for access roads within a landfill. And like, could we satisfy the concerns by just saying explicitly there other forms of it? So instead of other forms of disposal, like add a line that says does not include use of recyclable materials as ADC or access roads within a landfill.
So I think we can add that. I know we lost some folks too, and people have other meetings. So this might have to be addressed in our next meeting, which I think is March. So there's still opportunities to provide recommendations to the council. So I guess the question here, this is not, Kelly, what was your recommendation? And then I think we're gonna have to get back to this one.
Just adding to that list of I'm trying to read it, but what it does not, recycling does not include use of recyclable materials as ADC or access roads within the footprint of a landfill.
Or you could just say other forms of use within the footprint of a landfill, if that's what you're intending.
Hey, Bradley, this is Ellen. Just note, if you could withdraw the vote, then I'll have to get a better look at this. I want to go to abstain until I understand what's happening here. Thank you.
What were you before? Ellen?
I voted yay. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll have to have a vote too on this. Okay. Frankie?
I would go ahead and remove my yes vote as well.
And as an abstain or no?
I do abstain, so I have the same similar concerns that Scott Burke raised regarding whether this clause really meets our intent with adding it. So.
And then I'll just make a note here for
Hey, Bradley, you know we're out of time and you still haven't exposed to the public. I would say ask
Yes.
Scott and some of the other team members to provide the proper language for this so that we can revisit it.
yeah, we can definitely do that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to open to the public. So are there any members of the public who would like to make a comment? All right. Cool. Well, thank you, everyone, for this discussion. We are going to continue this at our next meeting, which should already be on the calendar. So there's going to be more opportunities to provide recommendations on the bills.
What date is that meeting?
I think it's March something. It's currently March 13th.
So by then, the the amended bill will already have been introduced and possibly even have been voted upon, correct?
Yes. When is crossover day? FYI.
That's 20. I don't know. It's either in the teens or the 20s.
The 17th. I think,
17th.
I think this is up the 17th.
My point is that there's already language been drafted for which this group has not been involved. And frankly, I find that very disappointing, the extent of any involvement by MDE in drafting alternative language, alternative legislation. That's all.
Yeah, Eric, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. I just saw that someone who doesn't have a name in the chat asked about an update for the needs assessment. Wanted to see if
that's me, John Nyman. I was just getting an update.
All right, sure. Yeah, Bradley, can I give a quick update?
Sure.
So the needs assessment is very close to being finalized. It's gone through the review by MDE. We've incorporated those requested changes, and it's looking to be delivered to them tomorrow. So that's where things stand.
And just a note, we are receiving, so the report is in, there's a main report and then there's technical appendices. We may be, if everything looks good, we may be posting the main report on our website today, if possible. And then we would also send it out to the council as well.
Sorry.
All right. I think, Scott, you had a comment, or is that the leftover?
Well, I was just going to suggest if we needed to try to do this before the 13th, that perhaps those of us that, I mean, I think MDE wants to have a conversation with me about ADC.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can circulate it to the advisory board.
I think we can
electronically.
I think we can set up another hour just to get to finish the conversation on the recycling definition and this item on syncing a potential deposit return system with EPR as well. So yeah, we could definitely look at something earlier than the 13th for that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate the conversation, and be on the lookout for another meeting probably in the next week or two.